Hello, my name is Kate and this is my channel, Chapter Kate. Today I'm going to be doing my first book review on this channel. Yeah. I recorded this entire thing yesterday and I hated it, so I'm trying again. I thought since my husband's out getting us sandwiches, then it'd be a good time to do it. Go ahead and do it now. Today I'm going to be doing a review on the book Nod by Adrian Barnes. It is an adult science fiction novel and it is amazing. So to, start with my first book review, I kind of had to think about how I want to do my book reviews and how I want to structure them, because I like to analyze books, so I'm not sure if that's entirely appropriate for book reviews, but I don't care, so I might just add some of that in here also. So the sections that I'm going to cover when I'm reviewing this is my first impressions, the characters, the plot, the language, and then just miscellaneous commentary stuff. So my first impressions of this book, I looked at the cover and I kind of picked it up based on the title more so than the cover, because it said Nod, and Nod is, another term for sleep, but it's also a term for a place that I believe Cain was sent after he murdered his brother Abel in the Bible. It's supposed to be everything that Eden is not, and Eden is his paradise, so Nod is a place of just monsters and terrible things, basically the rest of the world. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I read the premise, and it is about basically the entire world stops being able to sleep, except for a select few people who are able to sleep, but they have the same dream, and they find it really hard, increasingly harder to wake up from that dream. So I thought, from a psychological perspective, I thought it would be really interesting to see, because, if you don't sleep, your entire body gets thrown off. You have trouble thinking straight, focusing. Sometimes, if you've been sleep deprived long enough, your body shuts down. You start seeing things. You become more primal. A lot of things. So, and even thinking about my own experiences with insomnia. In college, I slept like every other night. Occasionally, I would stay up for 3 days in a row. And I remember, I'm sure everybody sort of has experiences at some point where you get so tired that you just laugh at everything. Or, you start writing about something or reading something and certain words just don't even feel like real words anymore because you're so tired. So just with my own experiences with insomnia, I thought it would be a really interesting read. My expectations for this book were kind of high, but I was also prepared to be disappointed because there's a lot of ways that this could be done badly. And I really, really wanted it to be done well, and I was really concerned that it wouldn't be. But luckily, I was pleasantly surprised. Since this book is centered around the idea of insomnia and sleep, I am wearing my pajama pants. You can't see them, but they're there. Little do you know, I always wear my pajama pants in videos because they're comfy, and I hate regular pants. So jumping right into the book, I want to start with talking about the characters. So the main character's name is Paul. He is a writer, and he writes books about etymology, so the study of words, where they've come from, how they've evolved over time. And he actually is the narrator of this story. Usually I don't like first-person perspective when I'm reading books, but my exception for that is when the person who is writing it does have something to do with writing or words or something like that, so it actually makes it interesting. And I am a lover of words when I'm reading. I love interesting words and playful uses of words. So I was really excited the fact that he is an etymologist and that he's going to be talking, using his own sort of perspective with his experience with words. Now, I also like to talk about names when I look at books. Paul was an apostle in the Bible, and that becomes relevant throughout the plot, the fact that he is an apostle. The name Paul also means scarce in certain places when I've kind of looked that name up. And Paul is one of very few that can sleep in this book. Paul is not particularly special. He does have kind of an apathetic way about him, but under that, he still has a sense of hope that he's sort of trying not to hold on too tightly because he knows things can't really get any better. And he also kind of exhibits a sense of duty throughout the book. Next is Tanya. Tanya is Paul's girlfriend. The name Tanya means fairy queen, which probably isn't relevant, but who knows, it might be. Tanya is presented as someone who may not be entirely likable, but even though Paul is the one describing her and it's his voice that we're looking at her through, he still defends her, as he's going on. He'll talk about how wonderful she is, or his, kind of the pedestal he's put her upon. And then we have Charles, who at the start of the book is kind of just I believe he's homeless, and he has actually read Paul's books. He's one of the few people that have read Paul's books in the library. But he is sort of treated as like the bottom of society at the start of the book, but he does prove himself to be opportunistic as the book goes on. And then last we have Zoe, who is actually a child in this book. She's a child sleeper. And she doesn't really speak much in the book, but the name Zoe means life, and she kind of represents hope and innocence. Next, I want to talk about the plot. In the plot, there are a couple of tropes present, but not very many like popular common tropes. One is the chosen one trope, where he is one of the very few who can sleep, Paul, but he's not the only one, so it's not entirely a chosen one trope, though he is sort of looked up to by some of the people in the book. The plot moves along at a really good speed. It's written day by day. It starts with, I think, day 18, and then it goes to day 1, day 2, all the way up to 17, and then it switches to day 19. So you kind of see how society crumbles more and more with each passing day. Though the author does talk about it being in Canada, I believe. I hope I had that right. I know the author's Canadian. I think that's right. He does talk about it being in Canada. However, the way it's described feels like it could be really anywhere, which makes it more relatable and more accessible to many people. Next, I want to talk about language. Language is something that is probably most important to me when I'm reading a book, is the words used and how they're presented and if they're clear. I think the language in this book is very clear and concise. It does use some words that are more complex because he is an etymologist, and he, will introduce each day with a phrase or word and the history of that, or the meaning of that. Reading it is clear, but it's not juvenile. It's actually very mature. You can tell that the narrator is sort of bitter throughout. He describes just in the first day, he kind of describes every emotion as pain. He describes his girlfriend as Medusa, and she asks if he sees her as a monster. But if you know the story of Medusa, she didn't start off that way, so there may be another parallel there. There are a lot of points in this book that make you laugh, even though it is serious content and it's a terrible thing that is happening. I also really love how in sections of the book he sort of describes people using terms that you would use to describe animals. And there's an entire section where he actually refers to them as animals. Instead of talking about them as humans, he switches to describing them as animals in detail, because the scene is just so terrible that I feel like looking at them as animals makes it easier for the narrator to process what is happening. And I think that is a really artistic choice from the author's perspective. I also find it interesting that the children who sleep in this book do not speak, especially because the narrator is an etymologist and words are his life, and the children don't speak. And it kind of points at words being sort of a source of lies and evil, in the book. It doesn't directly say that, but there are some things that kind of happen and that are mentioned that make it feel that way. For example, on the first day after not being able to sleep, Paul and Tanya are watching the news, and they're frustrated with the news anchors because they're talking about a situation that they don't know anything about. And so Tanya essentially says, well, why don't they just shut up if they don't know what they're saying? And I think that is interesting, kind of parallels to the fact that the children don't speak in this book. I also want to talk about my favorite quote from the book. I actually had a lot of favorite parts of the book. That's what these are all for. But my favorite quote on page 70, something horrible has just happened in the book, and he found himself unable to kind of help in the situation. And he says, and once more, we weren't heroes. And then a gap, a hole in this manuscript. And I feel like he shows there, again, there's an emergency outside. I feel like he shows there again that sometimes words aren't what you need them to be. Sometimes the lack of words, the lack of saying something is more valuable than words themselves. So lastly, I feel like the voice of the author in this book sounded very similar to George Orwell in 1984. And I thought that while reading the book, and then going to the back, he talks about George Orwell being one of his inspirations when he writes. And so I thought that was kind of cool. Overall, the book felt very timeless and important when I was reading it. Like, there's a lot to study and pick apart, but I only have so long for this video to do so. Usually in plots, you'll see everybody working towards a common goal, but in this book, their only goal is to survive a situation that's out of their control. So finally, I just want to say I'm going to give this book 5 stars, and I think that anyone should read it. If you like sci-fi, if you like dystopian, if you like a really thought-provoking book, then you're going to want to pick up this. And if you want more of this junk, hit subscribe below. Bye!